Commander Grak'tul of the Halaxian Hegemony adjusted his ceremonial armor for the 5th time, mandibles twitching with barely concealed irritation. His exoskeleton ridges flushed a deep purple, a physiological response his species evolved to intimidate lesser life forms. And by the 7 moons of Halax, humans were definitely lesser life forms. Status report on the human vessel, Lieutenant Norixus, he barked, voice modulator cranked to its most imposing bass frequency. Lieutenant Norixus, a young Halaxian whose carapace still retained its juvenile green sheen, nervously tapped at her datapad. The Earth ship Defiant has docked as ordered, Commander. Captain Morgan awaits your inspection team. Grak'tul snorted through his breathing vents. Morgan? Another ridiculous human name. These mammals and their obsession with liquids. I've studied their culture. It's a primitive beverage they consume to compensate for their evolutionary weaknesses. The bridge crew chittered appreciatively at their commander's wit, all except Admiral Pax Laura, who had served longer than any of them and had actually fought humans during the Proxima conflict. Commander, the Admiral said quietly, I would advise caution. Captain Eliza Morgan has a certain reputation. Grak'tul dismissed this with a wave of his primary appendage. Yes, the humans always assign their so-called best to these diplomatic missions, as if that will impress the hegemony. He flicked his secondary antennae in amusement. Their best is barely equivalent to our cadets. Admiral Pax Laura's compound eyes darkened. Sir, with respect, Morgan was the officer who single-handedly disabled 3 of our dreadnoughts during the ancient history. Grak'tul interrupted. The Treaty of Neptune established new protocols. We conduct these inspections, they comply, everyone maintains the fiction of interspecies peace. He leaned toward his executive officer. Besides, I've reviewed the human combat capabilities. Their muscle density is laughable. Their reaction time is glacial, and their carapace. He paused for dramatic effect. Oh wait, they don't have one. The bridge erupted in mandible-clicking laughter. Inspection team, assemble in docking bay 7, Grak'tul ordered, stretching to his full 9-foot height. Let's remind these soft bodies who controls this sector. As they moved through the gleaming corridors of the Halaxian battlecruiser, Inevitable Dominance, junior officers scurried out of Grak'tul's path. His inspection record was legendary: 13 non-compliant vessels seized in the past solar cycle alone. The humans with their backwards technology and primitive social structures would provide an amusing diversion at the very least. Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant, Captain Eliza Morgan was finishing her coffee. The mug emblazoned with "I survived Proxima, and all I got was this lousy mug" clinked against the table as she set it down. They're right on schedule, she remarked to her Jigsaw, Commander Jackson Okafor. Punctuality, the one admirable Halaxian trait. Okafor's expression remained professionally neutral, though his fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on his tablet. Captain. The Diplomatic Corps sent 17 urgent messages regarding this inspection. They're practically begging you to play nice? Bow and scrape? Morgan's steel-gray eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the only outward sign of her amusement. The treaty says they can inspect us. It doesn't say I have to tolerate disrespect. The last officer who stood up to a Halaxian inspector was reassigned to Pluto Station, Okafor reminded her. Morgan stood, straightening her uniform jacket. At 5'7", she was short even by human standards, but the 3 gleaming stars on her collar represented decades of service, 17 major engagements, and a resolve that had become almost mythological among both humans and aliens. Well then, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Tell the crew best behavior, but eyes sharp. The Halaxians have been pushing boundaries lately. Time they remembered why that's a bad idea. The intercom chimed. Captain, Halaxian inspection team requesting permission to board. Morgan nodded to Okafor. Let the games begin. The airlock hissed open with a theatrical whoosh that Grak'tul was certain the humans had programmed specifically to seem dramatic. He ducked his enormous head beneath the frame human engineering, so predictably inadequate for superior species, and stepped onto the deck of the Defiant with deliberate heaviness, his armored feet clanging against the metal. Commander Grak'tul of the Halaxian Hegemony, announced Lieutenant Norixis from behind him. Honor guard and inspection team of the third quadrant. 6 more Halaxians filed in behind him, each carrying scanning equipment and weapons that weren't technically allowed under the Treaty of Neptune, but that everyone pretended not to notice. The humans called it diplomatic oversight. Grak'tul called it strategic advantage. Captain Morgan stood at perfect attention, flanked by her senior officers. The human didn't salute a deliberate choice that wasn't lost on Grak'tul. The treaty specified customary greetings, and humans always exploited that vagueness. "Welcome aboard the Defiant, Commander," Morgan said, her voice neutral but carrying easily across the docking bay. "We've prepared all documentation required under Section 7 of the treaty." Grak'tul's mandibles clicked in what humans might mistake for acknowledgement, but was actually disdain. "Captain Morgan, your vessel appears functional." He glanced around the immaculate bay. "For human standards?" Morgan's expression didn't change, but Commander Okafor beside her shifted almost imperceptibly. Grak'tul's secondary antennae detected the slight elevation in the human's heart rate. "Good. They should be nervous." "We maintain our ships with pride," Commander Morgan replied. "Will you require refreshments before the inspection begins?" "We've synthesized nutrients compatible with Halaxian biochemistry." "That won't be necessary," Grak'tul said, adding, "Your species' obsession with consuming substances together continues to baffle the Hegemony's cultural analysts." Morgan's smile remained firmly in place. "Breaking bread together is a human tradition older than spaceflight, Commander. Some habits die hard." "Like your reliance on outdated military protocols?" Grak'tul gestured to a nearby weapon station. "This defense system was considered obsolete by Halaxian standards 3 decades ago. Yet remarkably effective during the Proxima conflict," Morgan replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lieutenant Norixis made a sound that might have been a nervous cough as she handed Grak'tul a scanning device. The inspection team spread out, moving through the ship's entry bay with practiced efficiency. "Engine section first," Grak'tul announced, ignoring the inspection protocol document that Morgan held out. "I've heard reports that human vessels have been exceeding their allocated power ratios." Morgan's eyebrow rose fractionally. "Our engine specifications are within treaty parameters, Commander. But of course you're welcome to verify that yourself." The next 43 minutes were an exercise in barely concealed hostility. Grak'tul's team scanned every compartment with exaggerated thoroughness, making disparaging comments about human technology loud enough to be overheard. The human crew maintained remarkable discipline, responding to questions with professional courtesy, despite the increasingly provocative nature of the inspection. "What is this modification?" Grak'tul demanded, pointing to a component in the engine room that glowed with a soft blue light. Chief Engineer Lavani Patel stepped forward. "That's a standard efficiency converter, Commander. It's listed in Appendix C of our technical specifications." "It appears to be a military-grade power amplifier," Grak'tul insisted, his voice rising. "Lieutenant, scan for weapons-grade output signatures." Captain Morgan intervened. "Commander, that component has been inspected and approved during 3 previous visits. It powers our life support redundancy systems." "Do not presume to tell me my job, human," Grak'tul snapped, towering over Morgan. "The Hegemony determines what is acceptable, not your primitive engineers." Engineer Patel's dark eyes flashed dangerously, but Morgan gave her a subtle hand signal, and the woman stepped back. "Perhaps," Morgan suggested with exaggerated patience, "you should consult the technical database. Section 47B specifically allows for this exact configuration. Your treaty interpretations are notoriously liberal, Grak'tul said, stepping closer to Morgan. His massive form now completely overshadowed her. The Hegemony has been far too lenient with your species. The human crew tensed visibly, hands drifting closer to their sides where Grak'tul knew their sidearms would be holstered. How predictable. No, Commander, Morgan replied, looking up without flinching. The treaty is quite specific. And if you had bothered to read the updated technical protocols from last quarter, you'd know that this component was specifically addressed and approved by your own regulatory commission. Grak'tul felt his chromatophores flush deep purple with rage. This small, soft creature dared to correct him. In front of his team? Your arrogance is typical of your species, he hissed, lowering his face close to hers. Perhaps that's why humans remain confined to this pathetic corner of the galaxy, while the hegemony expands across the stars. Morgan's gray eyes were unnervingly calm. Is that what they teach at the Hegemony Academy these days? Interesting revision of history, considering the outcome of Proxima. Something snapped in Grak'tul's usually calculated demeanor. Without conscious thought, his primary manipulator shot out, connecting with Morgan's shoulder and shoving her backward with enough force to send the human stumbling several steps. The room froze. Human hands flew to weapons. Halaxian scanning devices were suddenly pointed like defensive tools. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Morgan regained her balance with practiced ease. She straightened her uniform with deliberate slowness, her expression transforming into something that made Admiral Paxlora's earlier warning suddenly seem woefully inadequate. Commander Grak'tul, Morgan said, her voice deceptively soft, you have just committed an act of physical aggression against a Terran fleet captain during a routine inspection. Her smile was terrifying in its pleasantness. I believe that calls for a very specific response under Interspecies protocol. The tension in the engine room could have powered the Defiant's warp core. Every human hand rested on a weapon, every Halaxian sensor appendage quivered with alert signals. The Admiral Paxlora, who had joined the inspection team moments before the incident, looked like she wanted to dissolve into the ship's ventilation system. Lower your weapons, Morgan commanded her crew, her voice cutting through the silence like a plasma torch through butter. Now. The human officers complied instantly, though none looked happy about it. Commander Okafor's expression suggested he'd rather eat the ship's nuclear battery than stand down. Grak'tul recovered quickly, mandibles flexing in what passed for amusement among his kind. Oh? And what specific response might that be, Captain? Will you file a strongly worded complaint with your ineffectual diplomats? Morgan straightened to her full height, which still left her looking up at the towering alien. But something in her posture made several of the Halaxian junior officers take an instinctive step backward. According to Section 19, Paragraph C of the Treaty of Neptune, physical aggression during an official inspection creates grounds for immediate resolution through the Cultural Conflict Protocol. Morgan's smile widened just enough to show teeth. Specifically, the aggrieved party may select a traditional method of dispute resolution from their culture. A murmur ran through both human and alien ranks. Admiral Paxlora closed her compound eyes briefly, as if in pain. What nonsense is this? Grak'tul scoffed, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. The Hegemony doesn't recognize such outdated provisions. Morgan tapped her comm badge. Ship, Access Treaty of Neptune, Section 19, Paragraph C. Display on main engineering screen. The nearby display flickered to life, scrolling text in both standard English and Halaxian script. Lieutenant Norixus leaned forward to read it, then made a strangled sound. Commander, she said quietly, the human is correct. This provision was included as a concession to 17 species with ritualized conflict resolution traditions. Including humans, Morgan added helpfully. And as the aggrieved party, I invoke my right to challenge you to single combat, Commander Grak'tul. The engine room erupted into a cacophony of sounds, humans gasping, Halaxians clicking their mandibles in agitation. Grak'tul's exoskeleton flushed a mottled purple and green. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "I outweigh you by at least 200 pounds. My exoskeleton can withstand ballistic impacts. My strength is well documented," Morgan interrupted smoothly, "as are all Halaxian physiological advantages. The treaty accounts for this. The combat will be conducted according to traditional human rules, without weapons, until one party yields or is incapacitated." Grak'tul's laughter echoed against the engine room walls. "You can't be serious. Is this some primitive human death wish?" Admiral Pax Lora stepped forward. "Commander, if I may." "Silence," Grak'tul snapped. "The human wishes to embarrass herself? Fine. I accept this challenge. It will serve as an educational demonstration of Halaxian superiority." Morgan nodded once, briskly. "Excellent. As per protocol, the event will take place in a neutral location. Our cargo bay should suffice. Shall we say 5 minutes to prepare?" 5 minutes? Grak'tul's secondary antennae twitched in what humans had learned was Halaxian laughter. "Eager to meet your demise, Captain." "Just efficient with my schedule, Commander," Morgan replied, already turning away. "Commander Okafor will escort your team to the cargo bay." As the group separated, frantic activity erupted on both sides. The Halaxian junior officers clustered around Grak'tul, who was already removing his ceremonial armor to reveal the gleaming natural exoskeleton beneath. Admiral Pax Lora stood slightly apart, her expression unreadable. "Commander," she tried again. "There are records of Captain Morgan's combat proficiency that you should—" "Spare me your warnings, Admiral," Grak'tul interrupted, flexing his primary appendages. The musculature beneath his carapace rippled impressively. "I've studied human physiology extensively. Their bones break under minimal pressure. Their skin tears with the slightest abrasion. This will be over in seconds." Lieutenant Norixus nervously approached. "Sir, betting pools have already formed among both crews." "The odds?" She hesitated. "The humans seem strangely confident, sir." Grak'tul snorted through his breathing vents. "It's typical mammalian delusion. Their emotional attachments override logical assessment." Meanwhile, in a quiet corridor, Captain Morgan was calmly removing her uniform jacket and boots. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Talia Hernandez ran a medical scanner over her with worried eyes. "Captain, I must formally protest this course of action," Hernandez said, watching the scanner results with growing concern. "Halaxian strength exceeds human capacity by 2.7 times, bone density by 3.4 times, and reaction speed by 0.2 seconds, Morgan finished for her. "I've read the reports, Doctor." Commander Okafor stood nearby, his usually composed face a mask of concern. "There must be another diplomatic solution, Captain. We could contact headquarters, request." "And show weakness?" Morgan shook her head, stretching her shoulders in a casual rotation. "The Halaxians have been testing boundaries for months. Sometimes a line has to be drawn." Engineer Patel approached with a small case. "Captain, I've brought the equipment you requested." Morgan took the case with a nod of thanks, setting it aside without opening it. "Has the cargo bay been prepared?" "Yes, Captain," Okafor confirmed. "Standard human combat ring as specified in the protocol." "Betting?" Morgan asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Okafor couldn't help a small smile. "Heavily in favor of the commander, Ma'am. Our crew is investing differently." Morgan nodded, checking the chrono on the wall. 4 minutes have passed. We shouldn't keep our guests waiting. Dr. Hernandez made one last attempt. "At least let me give you a stimulant pack, or—" "That would violate the protocol," Morgan said, rolling her neck with a series of soft pops. "And I won't give Commander Grak'tul any excuse to invalidate what's about to happen." As they walked toward the cargo bay, Security Chief Riker fell into step beside Morgan. "Any tactical advice for the crew's betting pool, Captain?" he asked quietly. Morgan's face remained impassive, but there was a gleam in her eye that made Riker suddenly very glad she was on humanity's side. "Put everything on under 5 minutes, Chief," she said. Specifically, how long the commander will last. The cargo bay had been transformed with impressive efficiency. Cargo containers formed a rough circle approximately 20 feet in diameter. Human and Halaxian crew members lined the makeshift arena, maintaining a careful separation like opposite poles of a magnet. Admiral Pax Laura stood at what might be considered neutral territory, her posture rigid with what was clearly suppressed anxiety. Grak'tul strode into the ring with the confidence of a predator entering a pen of food animals. His exoskeleton gleamed under the cargo bay lights, an impressive display of biological armor polished to ceremonial perfection. He performed a series of stretching movements that caused his primary striking limbs to extend to their full impressive length, eliciting appreciative clicks from his crew. "This is ridiculous," he rumbled to Lieutenant Norixis, who stood at the edge of the circle. "I almost feel guilty. Perhaps I should only use my secondary appendages? Make it sporting?" Norixis's antennae twitched nervously. "Sir, Admiral Pax Laura suggested that." "The Admiral worries too much," Grak'tul dismissed. "Humans have built their reputation on propaganda and diplomatic manipulation, not actual capability." Captain Morgan entered from the opposite side, and Grak'tul had to suppress a clicking laugh. The human had changed into simple black fitted garments that offered no protection whatsoever. No armor. No exoskeleton augmentation. Not even the minimal padding that most species considered basic combat attire. She might as well have painted a target on her soft, vulnerable body. The human approached the center of the ring with that same infuriating calm, stopping a respectful distance from Grak'tul. She performed no elaborate stretches, no intimidation displays. She simply stood there, balanced on the balls of her feet, hands loosely at her sides. Admiral Pax Laura stepped forward. "As the ranking neutral observer, I will oversee this contest according to treaty protocols. The terms are unarmed combat until one participant yields or is rendered unable to continue. No lethal force is permitted." She paused, looking between them. "Are these terms acceptable?" "Agreed," Morgan said simply. "Let's get this over with," Grak'tul rumbled. "I have an inspection to complete." Pax Laura stepped back. "Begin." Grak'tul didn't waste time. He lunged forward with impressive speed, primary striking limbs extended to grapple the human in what would normally be a match-ending hold. His strategy was simple: overwhelm the fragile creature with superior strength and mass, force a quick submission, and minimize the embarrassment to her species. What happened next would be replayed in Halaxian military academies for decades. Morgan simply wasn't there. Where his grasping limbs should have found human flesh, they closed on empty air. A flash of movement to his left, and suddenly his center of gravity shifted as something the human's leg, he realized with shock, hooked behind his supporting limb and pulled. For the first time in his adult life, Commander Grak'tul found himself falling. His massive body crashed to the deck with a sound like a shuttlecraft malfunction. Before he could process this impossibility, the human had somehow moved behind him, applying precise pressure to a joint where his primary limb connected to his thorax. Pain signals flooded his nervous system, not debilitating but shocking in their precision. How did she know about that vulnerability? That particular joint was covered in his species' anatomical defense briefings. "What's wrong, Commander?" Morgan's voice came from above and behind him, sounding genuinely curious. "Gravity stronger than you expected on human vessels?" Growling, Grak'tul rolled and surged to his feet, carapace flushing deep crimson with rage and embarrassment. He heard the concerned clicks from his crew, saw the wide-eyed stares of the humans. This time he would be more careful. "A lucky maneuver," he snarled. "It won't happen again." Morgan shrugged. Probably not. That particular throw only works once on an opponent with your physiology. She smiled. I have others. Grak'tul circled more cautiously, his secondary antennae extended to maximum sensitivity to track the human's movements. He feinted with his left appendage, then struck with his right in a classic Halaxian combat combination that had evolved over millennia of interspecies warfare. Morgan slipped inside his guard like water flowing through rocks. Her elbow connected with a nerve cluster in his midsection that his own combat instructors had assured him was virtually impossible for non-Halaxians to locate. More pain signals, more precisely targeted than any he had experienced in combat simulations. That's two, Morgan commented, dancing back out of range before he could grab her. The human crew was watching with expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to outright glee. The Halaxians had fallen silent, their usual background clicking completely absent. How are you doing this? Grak'tul demanded, his breathing becoming labored. Human reflexes are documented to be. Slower than yours? Yes, Morgan agreed pleasantly. Which means I have to start moving before you do, reading your intentions, anticipating your attacks. She tapped her temple. Combat isn't just biology, Commander. It's psychology. Fury overtook tactical consideration. Grak'tul charged, bringing all four primary limbs into a devastating attack pattern that would overwhelm any defensive posture through sheer multiplicity of strikes. Morgan waited until the last possible moment, then dropped to the deck and rolled. Her foot lashed out, connecting with a point on Grak'tul's inner leg joint that sent conflicting nervous signals to his movement coordination center. His own momentum carried him forward as his legs temporarily stopped responding to commands. He crashed into the cargo containers with enough force to dent the reinforced metal. That's three, Morgan said, already back on her feet. From his position against the containers, Grak'tul became aware of something unprecedented in his combat experience. He was breathing hard, while the human showed no signs of exertion. His mighty exoskeleton, capable of withstanding vacuum exposure and moderate weapons fire, ached in a dozen precisely targeted locations. How long has it been, Lieutenant Norixus? Morgan called out casually. The Halaxian officer checked her timepiece. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, Captain. Plenty of time left. Morgan turned back to Grak'tul. Shall we continue, Commander? Or would you prefer to yield? Grak'tul roared, dignity forgotten. He launched himself at the human, all technique abandoned in favor of raw power and mass. If he could just get his limbs around her just once. Morgan sidestepped, grabbed one of his flailing primary limbs, and used his own momentum to redirect him, adding a precise twist that no being with an internal skeleton should have been able to generate. Grak'tul found himself airborne, his massive form completely inverted. Time seemed to slow as he rotated through the air. He saw Admiral Pax Lora's expression of grim vindication, saw Lieutenant Norixus's mandibles drop open in shock, saw the human crew nodding, as if this outcome had been inevitable. His impact with the deck was spectacular. The entire cargo bay seemed to shudder. Pain exploded across his sensory network as precision gave way to blunt trauma. Before he could even attempt to rise, Morgan was there, applying pressure to two nerve clusters simultaneously, one at the base of his cranial section, but one where his primary limb met his thorax. The pain was extraordinary. Not damaging, he realized through a haze of disbelief, but precisely calibrated to stimulate every pain receptor without causing permanent injury. It was the work of someone who knew Halaxian physiology better than most Halaxian combat instructors. Yield, Morgan suggested calmly, or I continue to the secondary and tertiary clusters. Your choice, Commander? I yield, Grak'tul gasped, the words burning his pride more painfully than Morgan's nerve strikes burned his body. Morgan released him immediately and stepped back. Lieutenant Norixus, time please? The stunned Halaxian officer checked her device. 4 minutes and 53 seconds, Captain. Morgan nodded with satisfaction. Under 5 minutes, as predicted. She extended a hand toward the fallen commander, a human gesture of assistance that felt like final insult to injury. Need help up, Commander? The medical bay of the Defiant hummed with quiet efficiency as Dr. Hernandez ran a tissue regenerator over Commander Grak'tul's injured limb joint. The Halaxian sat in rigid silence, his compound eyes fixed on some middle distance that existed only in his mind. The quiet hiss of the medical device seemed thunderous in the awkward silence. The nerve clusters will be sensitive for approximately 24 hours, Dr. Hernandez explained professionally, but there's no permanent damage. Of course not, Grak'tul replied quietly. The captain knew exactly how much pressure to apply. The door slid open as Captain Morgan entered, once again in her formal uniform. Admiral Pax Laura accompanied her, the two officers speaking in low tones. 15 similar incidents in the past month, Pax Laura was saying. The High Command has been concerned about the pattern but lacked sufficient cause to intervene. Morgan nodded. We've documented 23 violations, but proving intent has been challenging. Grak'tul's antennae drooped slightly in what humans had learned was the Halaxian equivalent of embarrassment. Captain. Admiral. He attempted to stand, but Morgan waved him back to the medical bed. No need for formalities, Commander, she said. Dr. Hernandez tells me you'll make a full recovery. Indeed. His mandibles worked silently for a moment before he managed, your knowledge of Halaxian physiology is unexpected. Morgan's smile was small but genuine. I make it a point to understand those I work with, or against, as circumstances dictate. The nerve strikes were adapted from traditional human martial arts, modified for Halaxian anatomy. You've studied our weaknesses extensively, Grak'tul observed, a new note of respect in his voice. I prefer to think of it as understanding our differences, Morgan corrected gently. The same knowledge that allowed me to temporarily incapacitate you would let me save your life in an emergency. The commander absorbed this, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The inspection report will reflect full compliance with treaty regulations, he said finally. Admiral Pax Laura's compound eyes widened slightly, but she nodded in approval. And, Grak'tul continued, I will be recommending a review of recent inspection protocols across all human vessels. Morgan tilted her head. That's generous, Commander. It is not generosity, Captain. It is he searched for the word recalibration. The Hegemony has perhaps been operating under outdated assumptions. Lieutenant Norixus appeared at the medical bay entrance, clearly anxious to avoid eye contact with anyone. Commander, the shuttle is prepared for departure when you're cleared by medical. As Grak'tul rose to leave, he paused before Morgan. The Halaxian Combat Academy teaches that humans are physically inferior but diplomatically cunning. I see now the assessment is incomplete. Morgan nodded acknowledgement. Most assessments are, Commander. Species tend to evaluate others through the lens of their own strengths. A mistake I will not repeat, Grak'tul promised. He raised his primary limb in the formal Halaxian salute, a gesture normally reserved for equals or superiors. Until our next inspection, Captain Morgan. After the Halaxians departed, Commander Okafor approached Morgan in the corridor. Ma-am, transmission from Fleet Command. They're requesting an explanation for why a routine inspection ended with you in hand-to-hand combat with a Hegemony officer. Morgan sighed. Tell them it's all in my report. And add that they might consider updating the mandatory reading list at the Academy to include applied xenophysiology and conflict resolution. Your book, Captain? Okafor asked with a smile. 3rd edition, Morgan confirmed. The chapter on properly channeling aggressive posturing among exoskeletal species seems particularly relevant. As they walked toward the bridge, Engineer Patel hurried to catch up, grinning broadly. Captain. The crew pool for the fight paid out at 12-to-1 odds. The mess hall is talking about renaming the synthetic coffee blend after you. Morgan laughed. Tell them to save it for when we really need it. For now, let's get back on course. She paused, looking out a viewport where the Halaxian vessel was preparing to depart. I suspect our next few inspections will be much more professional. Across space, aboard the inevitable Dominance, Commander Grak'tul watched the human vessel recede on the view screen. Admiral Pax Lora stood beside him, both officers silent until the Defiant jumped to FTL and disappeared. The humans have a saying, Pax Lora ventured finally. Appearances can be deceiving. Grak'tul's mandibles clicked softly. Add it to the official briefing materials for all inspection teams, Admiral, along with a note. Sir? Oh. Never shove a human during an inspection, Grak'tul said, especially if they smile afterward. It doesn't end well.